Best cinema camera for documentary filmmaking in 2022. Shot 1, take 1, audio track 1. The best camera for documentary filmmaking in 2022. In this video, I will set out to explain what to look for when buying a professional cinema camera in 2022. There are many advantages to using a professional cinema camera over a mirrorless camera. In a nutshell, what makes a professional cinema camera useful to professional filmmakers is being able to add things on and adapt the camera. I like to think of them like a Swiss Army knife or a Land Rover Defender. You might not really like them, but you can turn it into almost anything for any setup as long as you are willing to throw money at it, of course. The possibilities are endless. Well, they will end eventually when you run out of money, but besides that, the possibilities are endless. As many YouTubers will explain, you don't necessarily need a professional camera to make a film or an impressive YouTube video for that matter, but the best advice is to always buy the best camera that you can afford. So I will leave it to you to decide whether or not you really need a cinema camera. I personally film wildlife documentaries, and although it is very possible to film a feature-length wildlife documentary or even a docu-series on a prosumer mirrorless camera, which I have done by the way, this video is not going to be about that. This video is tailored towards those who are looking to buy a professional grade cinema camera. Some of the characteristics to consider when buying a professional cinema camera are: the camera should be foremost reliable. It should have the features and functionalities to film projects you would like to film. It should be somewhat resistant to harsh weather conditions or be weatherproof if you intend to film outdoors. The camera should also be easy to use and shouldn't overcomplicate your filmmaking process. It should be resilient enough so that if it falls off a tripod, or if you trip in the Amazon while walking, or if you have cytotoxic venom sprayed on it by a Mozambique spitting cobra in the African bushveld, the camera won't hopefully fall apart. Please note that this requirement may not apply to everyone. The camera should be versatile enough so that you can use it to film all different shooting styles, from over the shoulder to handheld, to being able to adapt to using it with a long lens or setting it up for an interview with just a simple lens swap. The camera should be simple to set up and have many filmmaking tools built into it, or allow you to add on the accessories to suit your particular shooting style. You should be able to fit it into a large camera bag such as a f-stop camera bag or a cine bag or the Shimoda backpack. It's always a plus to have fairly good low light capabilities so that you can film in a forest or at dawn or at dusk and be able to use a telephoto lens, which aren't the fastest of lenses, and usually have a minimum aperture of around f4. And lastly, a cinema camera should allow you to use batteries with a long battery life that are readily available, so that you can film all day in the field without having to worry about your batteries or constantly checking and changing batteries. We are already well into 2022, and I have been looking at buying a new cinema camera for the past 6 months now. The problem is that due to worldwide shortages, many cameras simply aren't available, or they require you to pay a deposit up front and sit in a waiting list for around 6 weeks or so. This simply means that some of the cameras featured in this video simply aren't available at this moment, or might not be so easy to get your hands on. Important features to consider when buying a cinema camera: sensor size, full frame or Super 35, dual native ISO, recording resolution, do you want 4K, 6K or maybe even 8K? What recording codec does the camera use? Does the camera have IBIS? Do you even need IBIS? When it comes to sensors, the general consensus is that full frame is way better than Super 35 or APS-C cropped sensors. But for wildlife filming and maybe for other types of documentary filmmaking, Super 35 does have its advantages. Generally speaking, a full frame sensor will obviously allow more light, meaning that you have better low light performance, and this may be a requirement for your projects. Full frame sensors, as we all know, are favored because it is very easy to create a beautiful bokeh in your shots, which you might love or you might not be fazed by. Beautiful bokeh can also be created very easily using a camera with a Super 35 sensor. So personally, this is not something at the top of my priority lists for wildlife filmmaking. Using super telephoto lenses on any Super 35 sensor will create a pleasing bokeh effect, whether you want it or not. It's just something that I don't even think about. Low light performance, on the other hand, might be a crucial requirement for you, especially if you are filming in shady or low light environments. I personally film most of my wildlife documentaries in the hot arid deserts and the African bushveld, where lack of light is not something that's an issue for me. And we often don't have permission to film before sunrise or sunset, but if I could, I would probably make low light performance more of a priority. So in a nutshell, full frame would be lovely to have, but for my personal filmmaking style, a Super 35 sensor is equally useful, if not better. A Super 35 sensor does have great advantages over a full frame sensor when you are filming at the end of a telephoto lens. I personally would far rather have a Super 35 sensor or a Super 35 recording mode that allows me to punch in as much as possible. There are so many instances when I've had to film at the end of a telephoto lens and I'm just not able to get any closer. Dual native ISO is an awesome feature to have, and it will make filmmaking in low light conditions a lot more manageable, as you can just jump to the higher native ISO setting when it starts to get dark. The Sony FX3, FX6 and FX9 do this phenomenally well. When considering which is the best camera based on the sensor specs, the recording resolution of a camera is another important feature to consider. This is something that's very much debatable. For YouTube, 4K is more than enough, and I wouldn't even worry about 6K or 8K for now. However, if you are planning on filming a documentary sequence for a big production company such as Netflix, Nat Geo or BBC Earth, you will see that shooting 6K or 8K may be a requirement. Although 4K is the standard at the moment, documentaries cost a lot of money to make, and it's often more cost effective to film it in 8K or 6K as opposed to 4K, as the production company might want to future-proof their film content for future projects. Another great reason to film in 6K or 8K is that you can simply punch in post-production if you want to and still have a decent 4K image. This could help you if you need a super close-up but originally shot the shot in a wider angle. You can simply film wider than you normally would and then choose how much you would like to zoom in later in post. If you are buying a camera with your own hard-earned cash, then the jump from 4K to 6K to 8K may not be possible due to your budget, although I would recommend 6K as the sweet spot when it comes to value for money. You're looking at spending around $10,000 or more for an 8K cinema camera at the moment, although the Canon 5RC is an amazing 8K video camera and it has a far more decent dynamic range than the Canon R5, which means that if you're on a budget and you absolutely require 8K, the R5C is an awesome budget-friendly cinema camera with DCI 8K Cinema Raw Lite 12-bit video, which is truly phenomenal for the price. Recording codecs should be important to you, especially if you are working on larger productions or if you are not going to be editing the footage. In this case, you might want to buy a camera that can record in a codec that is commonly used to edit with, such as ProRes or Red Code RAW. If matching footage from many cameras is not a big part of your editing workflow and you are a one-man band or a one-woman band, then this probably is not such a big deal for you. Sony, Canon, Blackmagic and Red all create videos that are very easy to color grade. If you are looking to record in RAW internally, then you might want to look at a Red or a Zcam, but most cinema cameras will allow you to record in ProRes RAW externally to recorders like the Atomos Ninja and Ninja 5 Plus. So it will be up to you to decide whether or not you really need a camera that can record RAW internally. Although most mirrorless cameras do have IBIS or in-body stabilization, this is not often seen in cinema cameras, and I wouldn't consider not having it an issue, as you can always use warp stabilizer in post-production. Also, when shooting on long lenses on tripods, IBIS can sometimes make it harder to actually get a steady shot, and often you will find yourself turning it off anyway. Mirrorless cameras such as the GH5 and the GH6 have amazing IBIS, and they can make run and gun filmmaking a breeze and save you a ton of time in post-production. But for filming documentaries on a steady tripod or over the shoulder, you really don't need this as much as you might think. And almost all cinema cameras don't have it anyway. What lens mount does the camera use? Are you able to use lenses from a third-party manufacturer, or practically just the lenses from the camera company? Will you be able to buy an affordable telephoto zoom lens to film far away or hard to reach places? Are you able to buy a good quality macro lens? The lens mount might be the determining factor when it comes to upgrading from a mirrorless camera to a cinema camera. You might find it far easier to stick with the present lens mount system that you are already using, so that you can continue using the lenses that you already own. For many, this means being able to continue using their EF or their E-mount lenses, depending on whether you are coming from Canon or from Sony. If you are coming from another manufacturer such as Nikon or Panasonic, you might want to adapt your lenses, or it just simply might not be possible. You may need to sell these lenses and buy brand new lenses. This might make it easier to decide which camera would best suit you, simply based on which lenses you currently own. You may also save a lot of money by not having to buy new lenses, so this is obviously an important factor to consider when upgrading. Selecting the right cinema camera for your filming style is only half the job. The other half is selecting the right lenses that will be best suited for you. It's always a tough process selecting the right lenses, and you should definitely make sure that the camera that you end up buying is compatible with the lenses that you have in mind. Find out how much all the lenses you plan on buying will cost you, then make a comparison with an alternative camera body system and lens system. Find out how much the lenses that you plan on buying will cost you, and then make a comparison with an alternative camera body and lens system. You might find out that it would be a cheaper or a better option for you to invest in an alternative camera system based on the overall camera rig you will be able to build. If you need specialized lenses like a telephoto lens or a macro lens, are the appropriate lenses available for the camera that you are looking at buying? These are questions that only you will know the answers to, and you will most likely have to make a healthy compromise between a good camera and a good lens set. What audio inputs does the camera have? Does it come with 2x XLR inputs or just a regular 3.5 mic jack? Does the camera have TIMECODE or GENLOCK? It might be important for you to buy a camera with 2 XLR audio inputs so that you can attach a shotgun microphone onto the top of your camera and record directly into the camera without having to carry around an external audio recorder. This is particularly handy if you are shooting alone or don't have the luxury of a sound recordist with you. You can get away with recording sound separately onto an audio recorder, but there are many instances when you will need to record audio into the camera. The other way would be to record your audio with an audio recorder and then sync your audio in post, but this can get extremely time consuming. A really cool feature to have on a cinema camera is internal timecode or GENLOCK. Cameras with their own timecode or GENLOCK will allow you to quickly sync your camera to a field recorder before filming, making syncing video and audio in post as quick as the click of a button. An easy and surprisingly affordable way to do this is by using a Tentacle Sync timecode generator. A somewhat unusual feature that you may be looking for is whether or not to buy a camera with lens mounts that are agnostic. In other words, certain cameras like the Z-Cams and the Kinefinity Mavo Edge 6K and 8K cameras allow you to swap lens mounts, making it very easy to continue using your present lenses or change the lens mount if you need to use a specific lens for a shoot. This is a rather new and exciting camera feature, and we can only hope that other camera manufacturers will follow suit. Agnostic lenses are another way to adapt lenses to different camera bodies. This is possible with a select few lenses like the DZO Films Kata lenses that allow you to swap the mount of the lenses so that you can use the same lenses on various lens mounts. Both agnostic cameras and lenses allow you to future-proof your lenses so that you will be able to not be tied down to one particular camera manufacturer in the future. This might open up a lot of options of cameras to buy now or when you need to upgrade in the future. If you are filming for a production company, then it is important to buy a cinema camera that meets all the requirements of your filmmaking needs or those of the production company that you plan to work with. The camera should have everything that you will need for approximately the next 3 to 5 years if possible. It would be a wise idea to contact the companies that you plan on working with and let them know that you are upgrading your camera and find out which camera they would recommend that you use and which one would be the best for their post-production workflow. There might be a certain feature that you haven't taken into consideration yet. It's important that the camera meets the requirements of the productions that you plan to be a part of. Another factor to consider is which camera will increase the possibilities of you acquiring more work as a freelance filmmaker in the future, and which camera is trusted and highly rated by the filmmakers that you plan on working with. This will depend completely on your personal circle and the companies that you work with. I have made a list of the cameras that I would consider to be the best cinema cameras for documentary filmmaking in 2022. The cameras on this list do vary in price, but they are all cameras that are extremely capable of filming a feature-length documentary. So I've broken this down into 3 different categories. The first category are cameras that are not cheap but not overly expensive. In this category, I would choose something like the Sony FX6, as it is possible to adapt this camera to almost every documentary filmmaker's requirements and needs, and it is compatible with many full-frame lenses that are readily available, such as the Laowa 24mm probe lens, which is a brilliant macro lens, and the Dizio Film Kata 35-80 and 70-135 cine zoom lenses. Sony also makes the FE70-200 and 200-600, which are very affordable telephoto and super telephoto lenses. One of the biggest drawbacks of the Sony FX6 is that it doesn't have a built-in ND filter, which for many run-and-gun filmmakers is a requirement. You can get away with a variable ND in front of your lenses, but they do tend to fog up in humid or wet environments. So if you are filming in the jungle, you might want to look at a camera that's got a built-in ND filter. Another way to address this problem is that I find a normal ND filter, not a variable ND filter, will tend to fog up a lot less. Another way of thinking about this is that it's just too much work, and on a professional shoot you'd rather just get a camera with a built-in variable ND filter, which will save you a lot of time and hassle. The Panasonic S1H and S1 are brilliant cameras with good low light performance and excellent image quality, and with paired with an EF adapter and a good quality lens, then you can create some very good documentaries. Because this camera does have a full frame sensor, you are able to create a beautiful shallow depth of field and bokeh in your footage. Another really good camera, which I haven't really spoken about too much in this video, is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro. This is a really impressive cinema camera packed with numerous features, and it's incredible to find so many features at such a reasonable price. This camera comes with a 21.2 megapixel Super 35 CMOS sensor that is able to shoot B-RAW at 6K. This camera also has 2 mini XLR inputs, which is incredibly useful for recording sound straight into your camera with a professional shotgun microphone, or to boom a microphone above someone during an interview. This will also save you a lot of money, as you could put this money towards lenses instead of putting it towards a separate audio recorder. It also has a built-in mechanical ND filter, which can reduce the amount of light that the sensor receives by up to 6 stops. Another amazing camera in this price range is the Zcam E2 F6, which is a full-frame 6K cinema camera that can shoot Z-RAW for only $3,500. The next category are cameras at around $6,000, and there are quite a few cameras that I would consider amazing cameras for documentary filmmaking. I would also consider $6,000 the sweet spot when it comes to buying a cinema camera. At this price point, there are so many excellent cameras to choose from, and you are comfortably able to buy a camera that will last you a good 3 to 5 years. You will also be able to find a camera to meet all your filmmaking needs. The cameras to take a look at in this price category would be the Sony FX6, the Red Komodo, the Canon C70 and the Canon R5C, and also the Nikon Z9. For around $6,000, I would recommend the Sony FX6, but it isn't available at the moment unless you are willing to put yourself on a waiting list. So personally, I'm not going to be getting the FX6. So that leaves the Canon EOS C70, the Red Komodo, and the Canon R5C in this price range. For more than $10,000, we also have the Sony FX6 and the Kinefinity Mavo Edge 6K and 8K. And at around double the price, we have the Red V-Raptor 8K VV. Many people make the mistake of allowing the price of a camera to determine which camera they will ultimately buy over whether or not the camera is going to meet their needs or whether they are going to get good value for money for the camera. I would far rather spend $4,000 or $6,000 on a camera that ticks all the boxes and provides me with a good base for the style of documentary filmmaking that I do than opt for a cheaper camera and be limited with the features or in the applications of the camera. The most important aspect is whether or not the camera that you are buying will be able to film the style of content that you plan on filming. If your budget is quite limited, then you might want to start with the best camera that you can afford and just one or two lenses until you are able to invest in more lenses and gear, rather than buying a cheaper, less capable camera with more lenses that you might or might not actually use once you get into the swing of filming with your new camera. With that being said, the lenses that you choose to buy to film your documentaries are just as important as the camera that you choose, and the lenses that you film with will determine how your footage will ultimately look and whether or not you will be able to get the shot or not. If you buy a camera purely based on its resolution or its amazing low light performance and neglect to focus your attention on which lenses you will be filming with, you will very likely limit your camera's ability to perform, and it may not perform the way you expect it to. For example, in my case, I know that for wildlife filmmaking, I require at least one long lens with a maximum focal length of around 500 or 600 millimeters. I spend much of my time filming at the end of my telephoto lens, so when considering which camera to purchase, before I look at the resolution it films, if it's 4K or 8K, what codec it films on, or whether it has reliable autofocus, I look at whether or not I will be able to buy the long lens for the kind of wildlife filmmaking that I regularly do. So which camera is the best cinema camera? Well, that will all depend on your budget and your filmmaking needs. I personally film most of the time with telephoto lenses. On the other hand, you might have a completely different set of requirements that will determine which is the best camera for you to choose. Just remember that whichever camera you choose to buy, it's the right camera for you. That's why you bought it. Don't overthink it. Just get the best camera that you can afford and then just move on. Honestly, don't even think about it, and it's really not important in the grand scheme of things. Any camera at this price will be a brilliant camera to film with. I hope this gave you some food for thought when it comes to buying a cinema camera this year. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you very much for watching. I know it was quite a long video. If you are personally looking at buying a cinema camera, then leave a comment below and let me know which cinema camera you are looking at buying and why you are looking at buying this camera. If you haven't already given this video a like, give it a like, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video where I'll be talking about which cinema camera I personally decided to buy. I'll see you there.